Naval Mine Warlock looking like a strong contender in the current meta. I'm Uncorrupt, and I'm going to show you how to play it. I've got the list pulled up right here, just a couple of notes before we jump into some gameplay. You'll be able to get a copy of this deck code in the description. If you don't see it, make sure you expand that description. Really, the card that's making this whole thing go round now is Defile, a card that came back when the developers reintroduced the Knights of the Frozen Throne set back into Standard. Everything else is pretty much the list exactly as it was before that change happened here recently. We're only going to have this deck right up until the March of the Lich King expansion comes out, so I suggest you enjoy it while you can. I'm going to show you how to do exactly that. Pretty much, if you're not familiar with the win condition of the deck, is we want to play a Naval Mine. We need this Naval Mine to die. Now, it doesn't matter if it gets silenced or not, as long as the minion dies, that Death Rattle is going to be available in the Tamsin's Phylactery. Then we're going to be able to put a lot of minions on the board, likely either with Wicked Shipment or with a Fiendish Circle. We'll be able to play the Phylactery to be able to give them the Naval Mine Death Rattle, and then we're going to kill off our own board, likely with a Defile, and that's going to send a lot of bombs into our opponent's face, and it's going to be able to kill them. One quick note here, definitely one thing that's going to help you is if you're familiar with your multiples of 4. I know a lot of people don't like math, maybe you don't like multiplying, but you can help yourself out maybe by just having a calculator open and being able to multiply by 4 relatively quickly. Also, one other note, with Tamsin Rome, we can potentially get a second copy of the Phylactery, which is going to allow us to be able to have 8 damage worth of bombs in each minion, so you're also going to need to know your multiples of 8. Let's hop into the game, and I'll explain how to play the deck. If you're still here, I know that you're not intimidated by doing math. Congratulations on that. I've got actually some pre-recorded games here that I recorded on my way back to Legend this month. So if it looks a little bit weird, that's going to be the reason why, but I kind of like this format because it's going to allow me to be able to pause the game and talk about it a little bit more, because when you're playing, you don't necessarily have time to, be talking about the plays, at least if you're me. So right off the bat here, we've got a game against Druid. As far as the mulligan goes, you're definitely going to want to keep the Ruined Mithril Rod. That's a key component in the deck, being able to reduce the cards in hand. I would also keep Tamsin's Phylactery, and against aggro, I actually like to keep Mistress of Mixtures to help us be able to fight for the board here. So nothing to do on this turn, we're just going to pass it right away. The way that you're going to want to play this deck is you can actually ask yourself a series of questions. And I'm going to go over these questions as they come up. So in the early game, the question that you want to ask yourself is, how can I draw more cards? We need to be able to draw cards with the deck. It's going to allow us to be able to discount those cards with the Mithril Rod once we have it in play. But at the end of the day, this is really just a combo deck. We're going to have cards to be able to win the game. So in the early game, how can I draw cards on turn 2? That's almost always a tap, as you can see here. And I'm pretty happy to be able to pick up the Phylactery. It's always nice to have that in hand, to be able to get discounted. It's also a 1-of in the deck, so you have to have it. Your win condition is built into that one card, and so definitely very glad to see it. So actually against aggro Druid here, and you can see here we already have a choice. So how can I draw more cards is a key question for the deck. An additional key question for the deck that we're going to add on to the questions that we're asking ourselves every turn is, how can I take less damage? So looking at this turn, the board setup is actually perfect for a Defile. If I Defile here, it's going to totally clear the board. We're perfectly fine doing that because we have a second Defile in the deck, which means we'll be able to clear off our minions when we need to for the combo. Against aggro, though, we're thinking about, how do I stay alive? So the question is, first of all, how can I draw more cards? Second of all, how can I take less damage? We need to make sure that we don't die too early. Now, in this particular situation, against an aggro Druid, I would be concerned about my opponent potentially playing a Herald of Nature, because if it buffs their board, it's going to make it significantly harder to remove. But two things here. Our opponent doesn't have any kept cards left in their hand. They also have not played a nature spell. So the play here is actually going to be to tap, and then we're going to Mortal Coil the 2/1. That's going to allow us to be able to draw 2 cards this turn. Our opponent doesn't really have a threatening amount of damage on the board, so that's going to be the perfect play for this turn. Again, we just want to get cards in hand because it's so important, and this is going to be the best way that we're actually able to do that. And then you can see that we're also going to have Thalnos and Defile, which is a guaranteed board clear for the following turn. So we're going to be doing that. It's just so good to be able to clear our opponent's board here. In this situation, they only have 2 cards left. Nothing's been buffed yet. So this play clears our opponent's board, and we're actually able to draw a card off of the Thalnos. And then we see here that our opponent actually just has basically nothing to do. They're AFK. which is really good news for us. And quite honestly, at this point, we've basically won the game here against this Druid deck with no cards in hand. They're just not going to be able to pressure our life total. Even though we're at 16, it's not that big of a deal. We do have healing in the deck. So at this point, it's likely a pretty straightforward, we're going to tap here, we're going to play our Knoll for only 1 mana, and then we're actually going to be able to get our Naval Mine in play as well. Again, pretty straightforward turn. We're able to develop our board. We get our Naval Mine in play. The Naval Mine needs to die so that we can have that Death Rattle in Tamsin's Phylactery. That's going to allow us to be able to end this game. So again, our opponent should likely concede here. They're never going to be able to win this from the position that they're in, but you have to respect it. This is just a straightforward trade, and we're going to go ahead and play the weapon. If our opponent is not conceding, we're going to equip the weapon. We're still going to be looking to draw cards, and then we're going to be looking to kill our opponent from there. So the third question that we're going to be asking ourselves as we're playing these games is, number 1, how do I draw more cards? Number 2, we ask ourselves, how can I take less damage? Because we don't want our opponent to be able to kill us. And then a third question that we're going to start asking around turn 4, turn 5, turn 6 is, can I safely play the Rune Mithril Rod? So we were definitely able to safely play the Rod that last turn, which is why we did. If your opponent has a more threatening board, you might actually have to address their board before you go about playing that Rod. So again, here, we're just trying to draw cards, so we have an easy trade with the Imps. We have a Mortal Coil, again, to be able to draw cards. And then I'm just going to go ahead and spend the rest of my mana with the Spice Bread Baker. It's going to give us some health. Again, this game is likely over. We're going to discount our hands next turn with the draw that is off the top. And we're going to see here that it's Impending Catastrophe. So on a turn like this, again, I'm just trying to draw cards here. So we're going to tap. We now have a trade available. So we're going to take a trade here. And then we're going to be able to eliminate a minion that's on the board. And it's good to also be able to just play cards out of your hand. We want to be able to play cards and free up hand space so that we have more room to be able to draw the cards that we really need to draw. I don't mind playing the Fiendish Circle here. It puts minions on the board, and it's going to, you know, our opponent can't clear this because of the kind of deck that they're playing. So we know that they're not going to be able to clear the board here, and once again, our opponent has a weak turn. The Malfurion was a little bit weird, but people are playing with the Knights of the Frozen Throne cards here. So unfortunately, what you're going to see here is I actually miss lethal. I have lethal on this turn. It's turn 9, but you can see they're at 37 health, which means that I would need 10 Death Rattle bombs to be able to go off. I have 5 minions on the board, one of which is a Naval Mine. The Naval Mine Death Rattle is already in place, so ideally I would want to go Tamsin, card, play the Phylactery, give everything the Naval Mine Death Rattle, and then I would be able to play the Defile, and I would be able to kill my opponent. Unfortunately, I just miss it here. No excuses, but I actually was not looking for lethal on this turn, which is going to be the final question that we're going to ask ourselves that we add in onto the other list of questions. How can I draw cards? How do I take less damage? And actually, do I have lethal, or can I kill my opponent? And you're going to see here that I just totally botched this turn and ignore the fact that I have lethal in hand. So it doesn't end up being a big deal in this game, but if you can imagine, there's games where you give your opponent an extra turn and they're actually able to kill you. So I edited out our opponent's turn. It doesn't really matter what they do. We still have lethal, and you're going to see that we actually get the combo here. And I think maybe even when I started this turn, I may have not realized that I had lethal in hand. Again, I was looking for my opponent to concede rather than looking for lethal. But you can see here, we have an abundance of minions on the board. We're going to be able to play these Tamsin's Phylacteries, give the Death Rattles to our minions, and then we're going to Defile, and it's going to clear the board here. Also, another minor misplay with this turn. With the Defile, I may have been better off to actually leave the Naval Mine on the board because it was at 2 health. So we have the Imps at 1 health. We would have had the Naval Mine at 2 health. We would have been able to clear the board with the Defile and win from there. And we're immediately into another game. So here we're going to be up against Hunter. And you can see I'm going to keep the Tamsin's Phylactery here. That's always a keep in this deck. We're also looking for Rod, but because we're up against a Hunter, I chose to keep the Mistress of Mixtures because I need to be able to fight for that board early. I like keeping it against decks that are going to be trying to build a board presence and come at us early. So pretty straightforward turn 1 here. We're going to play out the Mistress, and we're expecting to go into a turn 2 tap, which is exactly what we're going to do. Again, the question being, how can I draw more cards? In the early game, the question is always, how can I draw more cards? And then as the game goes on, we're going to be asking ourselves, how can I take less damage? So one quick note here, I wish I would have paused this a little bit earlier, but you could see that our opponent is actually a rogue and they played a secret. So I chose to tap and pass. I could have played the Mistress of Mixtures here. I was afraid that the secret was going to be double cross, that the rogue would be able to draw 2 cards if I spent all of my mana. So I chose not to spend mana in hopes that I'd be able to prevent my opponent from drawing cards. And what we actually see here was that I was incorrect. The secret was perjury. So I kind of wish that I would have had that 1 drop on the board, but I still think it was a correct play. We don't want our opponent being able to draw cards this early in the game. And we can see here that our opponent's going to stick Thalnos back in the deck. So that really wasn't that big of a deal with this Gravedigger. There was nothing in our hand they could put back that would cost us the game. Certainly we're glad that they didn't put away the Tamsin's Phylactery, because if that goes to the bottom of the deck, it gets harder to find. It's going to make it a lot harder to be able to win the game. So again, we're just looking to draw cards here. So this turn, to me, it just looks like a pretty straightforward. We're going to, first of all, test for the Hunter Secret. We want to find out if it's Freezing Trap or not. We know now that it is not going to be the Freezing Trap. We also know it's not Explosive Trap. So I'm going to want to check for an Ice Trap, and then I'll be able to drain Soul to be able to remove the minion that's on the board here. So I'm going to test with the Mortal Coil. It does end up being Ice Trap. I'm still going to be able to drain Soul. Again, just looking to take less damage here, and then I'm going to go ahead and play out this additional 2/2. So there is an argument there that turn that I could have tapped and just taken the damage from the 4/3, but I really don't like taking damage against rogues because they can do things like playing Gnolls. They can very quickly build a board presence. So that was how I chose to play that turn and the line that I took here. So again, we're just looking to draw cards, and as you can see here, we have 6 cards in hand. We also have the Fiendish Circle and Impending Catastrophe. So we're actually going to be able to draw 5 cards this turn without overdrawing. Again, it's a straightforward turn. Our opponent does have a 3/3 on the board. I'm not as concerned about taking 3 damage. I just want to draw cards. How do I draw more cards? And you can see here we hit the Ruined Mithril Rod. So next turn, we're likely going to be playing the Ruined Mithril Rod. We do have a board presence. We can remove some damage from our opponent's board, and equipping the Rod is going to go a long way towards helping us be able to complete that combo. And with Tamsin's Phylactery in hand, we have a Naval Mine in hand. Things are looking really good this game. We're going to lose our board, but our opponent actually just doesn't develop anything. So we're going to feel really comfortable coming into this turn, being able to play our Rod. And with the top deck Gnoll, we're just going to go ahead and get that Gnoll down. If I didn't top deck the Gnoll here to be able to remove our opponent's minion, I likely would have played the Rod and then traded the Wicked Shipment. But we're just going to remove damage from our opponent's board. Again, we just need to make sure that we don't die before we can piece together our combo. This game is actually looking really good. And we're going to know exactly what these secrets are because we know what our opponent's playing. It's going to be a Perjury, and this one is going to be a Double Cross. So again here, I'm really just looking for how can I draw the most possible cards. Not really worried about how much damage we're going to be taking from our opponent on the board. It's just all about drawing cards and proccing that weapon to be able to make things cheaper. So here we've got a pretty straightforward trade. We hit Tamsin, which again is great. This is another key component potentially from our combo, although you don't always have to have Tamsin. We have a second trade here. We're also going to be able to tap, which again I think is going to be correct. We're not going to overdraw. And then this is going to discount our hand. And I think we're going to, we want to go ahead and get our Naval Mine out on the board. And I think we want to go ahead and get this Death Rattle in so that we have access to being able to kill our opponent. It looks like we're actually going to be able to have lethal next turn because we have a discounted Phylactery, we have a discounted Tamsin Rome, we have a discounted Fiendish Circle. We also have potentially, or we actually have a free Wicked Shipment, so we know we're going to be able to put a lot of minions on the board. We're going to be able to give them the Death Rattle that they need. The one piece that we're missing here is Defile. As soon as we draw Defile, we win the game on the spot. So I realized that just a little bit late while I was playing the game, and I realized it again a little bit late while I'm commenting on the game after the fact. With no Defile, we're actually not going to be able to have lethal because we can't clear our board. And, we're going to play around that. So, again, we're just going to try to find a Defile. We know as soon as we hit it, it's over. We need 9 bombs to be able to kill our opponent. It'll be exact lethal at 36 health. So the play here, again, we're drawing cards, and then we're just going to play the entitled customer to be able to clear our opponent's board. How can I draw cards? We drew as many cards as we could. and then the question, how can I take less damage, all while still asking the question, do I have lethal? We know we have to have the Defile in this situation to be able to have lethal, so we're just playing it safe. Again, drawing as many cards as possible. It's a key component to being able to play this deck. And we're just kind of waiting to see what our opponent's going to do. And here our opponent plays Theatar. So one thing I will say about this deck, the only win condition that we have in the deck is the Tamsin's Phylactery. If our opponent plays Theatar and they're able to steal our Phylactery, just concede on the spot. You're not going to be able to win that game. It's actually game over. So fortunately here we have a lot of cards in hand. We don't have a lot of duplicates in hand. Actually, we have no duplicates in hand, so we're just hoping that our opponent doesn't hit the Tamsin's Phylactery here. And pretty much this game comes down to whether or not they do. They don't have it, so I think they've realized at this point that they have lost as well. And our opponent actually just concedes. Unfortunately, your opponent's not always going to let you have the fun of being able to play the pop-off turn. But likely a wise decision from our opponent. We had that game won. Going into a third game, we're going to see we're up against Demon Hunter. Again, we have the Phylactery in hand. That's going to be a keep every game, along with Rune Mithril Rod. And because I'm playing Demon Hunter, as far as I know, the only Demon Hunter deck that's being played right now is aggro. I'm going to keep the Mistress of Mixtures. We're going to play that out on turn 1 again, just to be able to fight for the board. It gets down a little bit of healing, and we're going to be able to go from there. So we go ahead and we get that down on turn 1. And we're going to tap on turn 2. And with the Mistress already in play, we're actually going to be able to heal back the tap that we're taking here, and potentially we're going to tap on turn 3 again, which will, the Mistress of Mixtures healing for 4, puts us back up to full health. So that's why we're keeping that card. And it looks like our opponent is actually removing the Mistress, and they're playing just a little bit slow this game, so that's going to be good news for us. And then on this turn, again, in the early game, we're asking ourselves the question, how can I draw more cards? This turn, it just looks like a pretty straightforward trade of the Wicked Shipment and tap. And I actually misspoke here. So the better play, instead of cycling a card by trading the Wicked Shipment and by tapping, the better play here, I didn't see it watching the game back because I wasn't paying attention, shame on me, is actually play the Wicked Shipment and Impending Catastrophe. That lets us draw 3 cards. So here in the review, I got it wrong. Live, when I was playing the game, I got it right. Drawing 3 cards is better than drawing 2 cards. And then again, with this turn, we're asking ourselves the question, how can I draw more cards? And so again, we have a pretty straightforward Mortal Coil. Then we're going to trade the Wicked Shipment. Again, just drawing cards, looking for things to do with our hand. And then I believe that we're actually going to just go ahead and get down a Mistress of Mixtures here. And I'm going to go ahead and take the trade just to not take damage. Our board doesn't really matter. We don't need minions to be able to punch our opponent in the face. There were a couple of different options. You know, we could have tapped there to be able to draw an additional card, but with the Tamsin Roam in hand, I want to make sure that I can play the Tamsin on turn 6. That's going to draw us 3 cards, but I don't necessarily want to overdraw, and so that's the reason why I took the line that I did. Gives us a little bit of board presence to be able to fight for the board, and setting up for a stronger play. So this turn, again, as I'm looking at this, it's pretty straightforward. Question number 1, how can I draw cards? I'm going to be drawing 3 cards next turn with the Tamsin Roam, so I don't necessarily want to tap. Or, I'm sorry, maybe I do want to tap. It's going to depend on how many cards that I have in my hand here. So, but this play for me is a pretty straightforward. I know I'm drawing 3 cards next turn with Tamsin. We're going to just play out the Knoll for 3 mana, and then we're going to go ahead and get our Death Rattle in play. If we tap here, the Knoll would have been 1 mana cheaper, of course, but then we would risk potentially overdrawing with the Tamsin, either next turn or potentially with the turn after with the draw off the top. So by taking this line, playing the Tamsin, it's going to draw us cards. It's going to kill our Naval Mine, which is going to put the Death Rattle in play for the Tamsin's Phylactery. It's going to heal us by giving us armor, and potentially it can address our opponent's board here. So we took a line that allowed us to make the Tamsin on turn 6 just be incredibly, incredibly powerful. And most likely nothing our opponent does is going to change us from that course. So we do see the Blade Master Okani come down, and so we're going to have to be careful about how we approach our turns as far as, is it going to block a spell or block a minion? Certainly we don't want our Phylactery getting blocked. We don't want our Tamsin minion being blocked. But we're just going to play the Dreadlich Tamsin. It's going to put some damage towards the Blade Master Okani. It's going to draw cards, and that's going to be all good news for us. So again, There was nothing that was really going to cause us to change the turn that we were going to play. And we see now also that we have a Ruined Mithril Rod in hand. So before our opponent made this play, I was thinking to myself, I'm going to play the Ruined Mithril Rod next turn, and then I could potentially test for a minion block with a Knoll. I could test for a spell block with the Drained Soul, either of which would most likely be fine. But now that I see the Lady Sethino come down, I have to change my plan entirely. So how can I draw more cards? The key question here is, how can I take less damage? So now that we have a Rod in hand, we would be asking ourselves, can I safely play the Rod? The answer to that is no, because our opponent has an extremely threatening minion on the board in the form of Lady Sethino. So can I safely play the Rod? The answer is no. So the only question that we're going to have left here is, how can I take less damage? I need to address the Lady Sethino. So you can see I'm going to test for the minion counter, and that's perfectly fine. So the reason here why it's fine to lose the Knoll, number one, we want to clear off the minion counter. And so the turn could have been played a little bit different, but testing for the minion counter, if it's not a minion counter, we now have the Knoll to be able to remove Lady Sethino, which is the goal of this turn. We want to remove the Lady Sethino. Now that we know that it's minion counter, we're free to play spells. We have spells in our hand that's going to allow us to be able to remove the board. So we've got a Drained Soul to remove what's left of the Okani. Not necessarily a priority, but it is going to save us damage as we are starting to get low at only 14 health. But then we're also going to have 2 copies of Touch of the Nathrezim that's going to allow us to be able to remove Lady Sethino and give us a little bit more healing here. So we're going to heal up for, I believe, 6 health this turn. And good news, we also had room to be able to tap. So you really have to plan your turn out ahead of time. We were going to have 2 mana to be able to tap. We tap first, which is exactly the correct play. And so now we've been able to go back up to 20 health, and we're likely going to be looking to, if possible, play the Ruined Mithril Rod next turn so that we can start to discount our hand. We have really a lot of the tools that we're going to need in order to combo our opponent here, especially with the Rod, if we're able to get these discounts. So coming into this turn, again, we're going to be looking, how do I draw more cards? How do I take less damage? Can I safely play the Rod? And do I have lethal? So you can see through the progression of the game as the turns get later and later, we're still asking the same questions throughout the game. We're just adding on an additional question at certain turns in the game. As we get later into the turns, can I play the Rod? Do I have lethal? So I'm going through this turn. Again, they only have a 4 attack minion on the board, so we're going to be able to play the Rod and tap here. That's going to be able to get us the first tick on the Rod. And we're actually going to see here, I believe we draw 3. We draw 3 imps, so that's actually going to discount our hand here. And so now looking at this situation, our opponent's at 26 health. That means 7 times 4, we're going to need 7 bombs to be able to kill our opponent. We have a discounted Naval Mine in hand. We have a Fiendish Circle in hand. We have Thalnos in hand, we have Defile, we have the Phylactery, so we actually have lethal next turn. So at this point, we're really just doing what we can to be able to survive. As long as we don't die on our opponent's next turn, then we're expecting to be able to kill them with the combo, just because we're going to be able to create so many Death Rattle minions. And ultimately, I decide to just pass turn here. There's no way that I can heal. I don't really need to do anything else. Even if our opponent has Jace to be able to repeat the Fell spells that they've played, it's not going to be enough damage to be able to kill us this turn, and we're expecting to just kill our opponent. And I believe that's exactly what we're going to be able to do here. Again, we only need 7 bombs to be able to get us to the more than 26 health that our opponent has left. And you can see they had a relatively weak turn here. Unfortunate for them. And so we're just going to go about our business setting up this lethal. So there's a couple of different ways that this turn could have been played. We're just killing our opponent. It's important to keep in mind here, depending on how many bombs you need, whether or not your Defile is going to be able to clear the board. We have no issues Defile with Thalnos, but we also had the 2 health minion with the Naval Mine, which you can see more than enough to be able to kill our opponent in this situation. We kept pressure off of our health total, even though we did take a lot of damage. We were able to draw cards, discount cards, and set up lethal. That's going to do it for the guide. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Uncorrupt. Have fun playing some Naval Mine Phylactery Warlock, and good luck out on the ladder.